The roaring thunder of motorcycle engines echoed across the dusty highway as a pack of leather-clad bikers pulled over near a rundown gas station. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of orange and gold. But amidst that glow, a small silhouette appeared. A little black girl, maybe 8 years old, barefoot, her dress torn, and her hands trembling as she pointed a gun straight at them. The leader, a man with cold blue eyes and a scar cutting across his cheek, froze mid-step. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Which one of you is my father?" The world seemed to stop. Birds fell silent. Even the wind refused to move. Hours earlier, the same highway had seen that biker gang roar past the outskirts of a forgotten southern town, a place where the walls still whispered segregation and people carried their history like invisible scars. That town had one diner, one church, and one secret everyone pretended not to know. The little girl, named Lila, lived in a crumbling trailer with her grandmother. Her mother had died giving birth to her, a black woman who once worked at that same diner where strangers came and went, leaving behind stories, heartbreaks, and sometimes children. Lila never knew her father, only that he was a man with a skull tattoo and a shiny bike. Her grandmother, too ashamed to tell the truth, kept silent for years. But small towns have big mouths, and one overheard conversation was all it took for Lila to start her search. That morning, she packed nothing but her mother's old photo and a rusty revolver that had belonged to her late grandfather. Her tiny hands could barely hold it, but her will was heavier than fear. She waited by the gas station all day, watching every biker who passed, hoping the face from her nightmares, the face she had never seen but somehow felt she would recognize, would appear. When the thunder of engines came closer, she knew. The bikers weren't just any gang. They were the Iron Saints, a feared motorcycle club that rolled through towns like ghosts, untouchable, unstoppable, and mostly white. Their leader, Jack Blaze Harris, had a reputation that stretched across state lines. But there was one story buried deep in that legend, a night 15 years ago when he disappeared for days and came back quieter, meaner, with eyes that never met the mirror again. As the gang refueled, Blaze noticed her, standing still, like a shadow with purpose. Something in her face froze him. He tried to brush it off, but when she raised that gun, his heart cracked open. The men behind him tensed, ready to draw their own weapons, but Blaze raised his hand to stop them. The sight of that child, shaking, eyes full of hurt, dragged him backward in time. Back to that one night when a young waitress had smiled at him from behind the diner counter. She had a laugh that sounded like music, a kindness that made him feel human. But in a drunken rage, the same man who led his crew into chaos left her crying in the dark. She disappeared soon after. Blaze never searched. He didn't want to face what he'd done. Until now. Lila's voice wavered, but her resolve didn't. "You hurt my mom," she whispered, tears streaking through dirt on her cheeks. Blaze felt every word like a blade. His men glanced nervously, confused, unprepared for the crack in their leader's armor. One wrong move and the scene could explode. A frightened child with a loaded gun, a gang of outlaws on edge, and decades of buried guilt ready to detonate. But instead of reaching for his weapon, Blaze dropped to his knees. The sound of his chain hitting the ground echoed louder than the engines. He spoke softly, his voice rough from years of silence. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. His past stood in front of him, trembling but alive. A child who deserved answers. He told his men to step back. For the first time in years, Blaze took off his leather jacket, the one stitched with the emblem that defined him, and placed it on the ground before her. "Your mother's name was Alana, wasn't it?" he asked. The girl nodded, the gun still raised. He closed his eyes and said, "I loved her. I ruined her life." The confession hung in the air like smoke. The bikers looked at each other, unsure whether to be angry, ashamed, or afraid. Blaze reached out slowly, not for the gun, but for the truth that had been waiting too long to be spoken. "You don't need that," he said quietly. "You've already done what I couldn't. Face me." Lila's arms trembled, the weight of revenge crushing under the pull of something even heavier. Compassion. She lowered the gun, tears spilling freely. Blaze took a deep breath, one that felt like it had been locked inside him for decades. "I can't undo what I've done," he said, "but I can give you what I never gave her: protection, honesty, a father's truth." The men behind him shifted, uncomfortable. Some muttered, others bowed their heads. The road warrior they'd followed for years was suddenly human, broken, but real. And in that humanity, something shifted in all of them. They saw the man, not the monster. The sun dipped lower as Blaze took Lila to her grandmother's trailer. The old woman froze when she saw him, recognizing the ghost of her daughter's past. But instead of fury, she saw remorse, a kind that time had carved deep. Blaze didn't ask for forgiveness. He only promised to do what was right. Over the next weeks, he sold his bike, disbanded the gang, and started working in the same diner where Lila's mother once stood. The locals whispered, some with hate, others with disbelief. But for Lila, it wasn't about redemption. It was about finally knowing where she came from, even if that truth was ugly. Years later, people in that town still talk about the day a little black girl stopped a biker gang with a gun and changed the heart of a man no one thought could be saved. They say she didn't just find her father, she forced a whole town to see how the sins of the past still live among them. Blaze spent the rest of his days quietly, never claiming heroism. He taught Lila how to ride, not to escape, but to move forward. She grew up strong, unafraid to face the world that once tried to erase her story. Some say justice looks like punishment. But sometimes justice is truth, painful, raw, and transformative. In a world still haunted by prejudice and silence, one little girl reminded everyone that courage isn't in the trigger you pull, but in the forgiveness you choose. So when people ask about the Iron Saint's last ride, they don't talk about engines or tattoos anymore. They talk about the day the past came back, wearing the face of a child.